A chance meeting rewrites destiny. Grace never expected to stop dead in a crowded spot, especially a restaurant, just because she spotted Nathaniel Brooks. The man she viewed as stone-cold and perfectly steady sat opposite a strikingly beautiful woman. Flickering candlelight illuminated a rare, genuinely soft smile on his face. She really should have walked. But as the woman's elegant fingers slid dangerously close to his on the tablecloth, a sudden painful twist of fate gripped Grace's chest. So beneath the gaze of the entire room, she marched over, stared right into his eyes, and dropped a bombshell. "I missed you." Now, who exactly was this mysterious woman sitting across from him? Stick with me here. Why did those three little words shatter every secret they were keeping? This life-altering evening actually began like any normal Tuesday for Grace. Way too long, too incredibly loud. Ending in the heavy burnout of a CEO absorbing everyone else's chaotic panic on top of her own stress. She had just survived a brutal executive board meeting at Meridian, one of the most elite fine dining spots in town. She was striding for the exit with that ruthless, sharp efficiency she brought to literally everything. Her mind was already racing. Which corporate files needed checking before dawn? She was mentally drafting an email. Then a random glance changed her fate entirely. Nathaniel Brooks sat by the glass, back half turned to the crowd, jacket tossed aside, collar casually unbuttoned. He stood out completely from the slick, overly polished suits normally commanding those VIP tables. No flashy luxury watch to flaunt, no fake arrogant posture. He sat exactly as he lived, zero theatrical performance and absolutely no apologies. The woman seated across from him was Chloe Bennett, and she matched the upscale vibe perfectly, cool, composed, and elegant. Her soft laughter and relaxed shoulders hinted at a life of effortless wealth. From Grace's exact vantage point, the fateful picture snapped into perfectly agonizing, crystal-clear focus. An intimate table, soft candles. Two people leaning in close, wrapped in that magnetic pull where no one else in the room even exists. Grace froze completely. The raw emotional impact of it honestly shocked her. For months, she had rationally convinced her own mind that Nathaniel was just an employee she mentored, a hard-working single dad she highly respected, just a disciplined guy she admired from a safe professional distance. She played it safe, brilliantly fooling everyone, even herself, until chance suddenly intervened tonight. She saw Chloe whisper something, making Nathaniel's guarded face soften. That exact, gentle look she had witnessed maybe twice in all their past interactions. It made Grace feel a reckless, burning foolishness she hadn't felt since she was 23. Her brain screamed to leave. She grabbed her heavy coat. She took 3 quick steps to leave. Then Chloe slowly reached across the table, her fingers resting near his with the casual ease of a woman who belonged there. Their intimate closeness changed everything. Fate demanded action. Grace spun around. She marched through that dining room with zero plan, totally unscripted. You and I both know the feeling. 38 years of corner office composure instantly shattered. Have you ever had a chance meeting that changes everything? Nathaniel looked up, utterly stunned as she reached his table. Chloe glanced up a split second later, looking polite and curious. Grace spoke simply, "I missed you." Those heavy words hung in the air between them, refusing to fade. A passing waiter slowed down. Chloe's mouth dropped open in surprise. Nathaniel just sat in stunned, heavy silence. In that quiet pause, Grace heard everything she should have said months ago, but never did. She couldn't take those words back. Standing there in the dim candlelight, she wasn't sure she even wanted to. Exactly 3 months prior. Let's rewind together. Nathaniel Brooks entered the executive office with a leather folder and a deeply unusual, calm stillness. The kind born from already surviving absolute worst-case scenarios. He was 36, raising a 7-year-old girl named Emma alone. He had spent the last year desperately learning to rebuild his whole life after a mess he didn't even cause. He spent 4 years as an operations manager over at Grayline Logistics, a mid-size freight startup that to anyone looking seemed bound for major industry success. But from the inside, the ugly truth slowly started showing its true colors. Senior leaders were cooking the books and burying employee complaints for so long that when the final crash happened, it hit hard and without warning. Nathaniel actually flagged 2 massive accounting errors to his boss before things ended. He even put it in writing. Nothing changed except upper management quietly added his name to a list. When the angry creditors finally swooped in, Nathaniel was the first guy fired. He rarely told people that part. He didn't want any praise or sympathy for it. Emma's mother had walked out 4 years before the layoff hit. So by the time the steady paycheck vanished, little Emma only knew life with just her dad anyway. But she definitely wasn't used to seeing this kind of scary uncertainty. And Nathaniel worked himself to the bone to keep that daily panic hidden. Within 3 weeks, he snagged a temp job in Holloway Capital's logistics department. The corporate salary was worse than anything he had made in 10 years. The role offered absolutely none of the executive title he spent years chasing. He took the job anyway. The very first time CEO Grace noticed him was during a freight routing disaster that usually took 2 days to fix but was handled in 4 hours because Nathaniel calmly identified the exact system failure and suggested a genius solution while everyone else just sat around screaming about blame. He didn't seem to care at all about the office drama. He only cared about fixing the actual business problem. Now you and I know CEOs rarely do this, but Grace memorized his name right then. What followed wasn't a traditional romance, and neither of them ever called it a courtship. It was a simple string of tiny everyday moments that built up before either of them realized they were falling for each other. Like when he saved her from blowing a huge vendor contract she was totally about to fumble. He smoothed over the tension so naturally, it almost looked like pure chance. As she walked past. A chance meeting can change a life. I found him in the break room that Thursday, working since 6 a.m. It all started on a random Sunday, during a small company event that neither of us honestly wanted to attend. His daughter Emma wandered over to me. She had that fearless directness of a kid, no need for social distance, and said, with the pure honesty of a child, "My dad always acts strong even when he is incredibly tired." I thought about that sentence a lot in the busy corporate weeks that followed. But I didn't act on a single word. I had reasons that were real and reasons that were convenient. And I wasn't always sure which was actually which. The biggest corporate roadblock was Sebastian Cole, a business partner. Our engagement was treated like a corporate merger, discussed like a formal arrangement. Just a strategic alignment between two executives with highly compatible traits. We shared interests and the social intelligence to know this should be enough. Sebastian was charming, but only like someone who studied charm and applied it with cold precision. I wasn't in love with him when talks about our executive future began. And I certainly was not in love with him now. Part of me used the structure of that CEO lifestyle to hide from what I actually truly wanted. Nathaniel had felt the magnetic pull too. He never confused his own feelings for someone else's hidden corporate intentions. You and I both know what he felt when I was near him wasn't just some polite professional respect. But he was also realistic, fully aware of the massive gap between our corporate positions. He knew the cost to Emma if he became just another office gossip story told for sport. So we were both very careful. We stayed incredibly quiet and built a shield. An unspoken agreement to hide it. Until that night in the restaurant where 8 little words dismantled absolutely everything. When Chloe suddenly stood up, she offered me her seat with the smooth politeness of someone totally at ease. I felt my stomach drop. I realized I had made a massive, embarrassing mistake. Up close, their table didn't look like a romantic date. The papers by Chloe's bag were clearly legal documents. The look on Nathaniel's face wasn't the look of a guy in the middle of a romance. It was the face of a man who was dealing with a completely different kind of business. He introduced Chloe quietly with zero drama. Chloe Bennett, a family lawyer who stepped in. She met Nathaniel through a community group. She was just helping him set up the structure for an educational trust. Not for himself, obviously. For Emma and for other kids in tough spots that the organization was fighting to support. I slowly sat down. You and I know that feeling of sudden clarity. Over 20 minutes I understood my giant mistake. Chloe's mother, Margaret Bennett. She heard about his struggles and offered funding for a trust. It would pay for Emma's schooling and then some. It would also help a handful of other kids from displaced families. Nathaniel refused to take a single personal dime. He only agreed when the structure was redesigned to help multiple struggling families at once. This was the woman I was ready to hate. Watch how a chance meeting alters things. She just helped a single dad secure a future for kids he'd never even met. Grace was painfully aware of what she looked like marching across that busy restaurant floor. To her credit, Chloe didn't seem to enjoy this heavy, awkward tension at all. She just sat there, present, kind, and incredibly discreet. Once the plates were cleared and the small talk finally hit a natural dead end, Chloe excused herself with a quiet grace, clearly understanding the shifting fate in the room without needing to say a single word out loud. She offered them one lingering glance before getting up from the table. That look held something deep and knowing. A second later, she was completely gone. Suddenly, it was just the two of them alone with the empty water glasses. The restaurant hummed blindly in the background, totally unaware of the life-altering collision Grace had just triggered. Nathaniel finally broke the silence. "Did you actually mean it?" he asked. "Or were you just furious because you caught me with another woman?" Grace did not answer right away. Not because she was trying to dodge the question, but because answering meant facing an honest truth she hadn't prepared her heart for yet. She let the silence hang for a long moment, and in that pause, she realized this was a truth she couldn't spin, manage, or rewrite. She had absolutely meant it. She'd felt that way for months, and she finally told him so. Under the cold glare of the parking lot lamps behind the restaurant, Grace looked exactly like what she truly was in that raw moment. A CEO who had finally spoken her truth, standing in the evening chill while destiny settled around her. She quietly apologized to Nathaniel for crashing his date earlier, for making a scene, and for showing up completely without a real game plan. He didn't seem to care much about her apology, though. He was searching for an answer to something else entirely. "Every time I stepped toward you," he said, "you retreated." Not cruelly but firmly. His tone wasn't an attack. He was just laying out a fact that demanded an honest answer. So Grace gave him one. "You and I know corporate politics." She explained how board members weaponized her romance as data to harshly judge her focus as a corporate leader. She opened up about Sebastian. Admitting that out loud felt incredibly uncomfortable. It meant admitting she'd let a hollow arrangement drag on, long past the point of being honest or good for anybody involved. She confessed the deep, secret fear she carried around daily. A dark fear she hadn't dared to name until this very night. That if someone snapped a photo of the high-powered CEO and a logistics coordinator, the media spin wouldn't be kind to either of them. The world wouldn't ask about their love. It would just judge. Finally, because he'd laid his cards out, she revealed her darkest fear. She was terrified of how she felt around him, afraid of surrendering control to a passion she couldn't neatly schedule or manage in a boardroom. Nathaniel stood there and absorbed it all. When he finally replied, he didn't brush off her anxiety or try to sugarcoat the heavy reality of the situation. Instead, he shared the heavy burden he carried. He brought up a parent at Emma's school who had cracked a cruel joke 9 months ago, questioning if his sudden job at Holloway was a coincidence. Chance meetings leave a mark, don't they? He confessed what it felt like to grind every single day of his adult life for something genuine, only to watch outsiders assume he must have cheated his way up or simply leached off somebody else's power. He admitted his daughter Emma had asked twice why certain parents at school spoke to him entirely differently than they treated all the other parents. He had no idea how to explain it. He just didn't want his 7-year-old carrying the ugly weight of that truth quite yet. The physical space between them was painfully small. The city rushed past them at its typical uncaring rhythm. Right before he turned to his car, Grace whispered softly, "I had no intention of saying this tonight, but I really missed you." That part was absolutely true. Nathaniel froze for a second, studying her with the intense kind of sharp focus he always saved for things he genuinely valued. But he didn't pull her close. He completely refused to offer what she desperately wanted to hear. Instead, he replied, "Then don't wake up tomorrow and pretend you never said it." She watched his taillights vanish into the traffic. She lingered on the curb until a valet actually asked if she needed help. She absolutely did not need help. She had to realize a chance meeting had altered everything, and that the careful, emotional wall she safely guarded for months was completely gone for good. You see, the drama sparked from a restaurant worker who secretly recorded 43 seconds of Grace crossing the floor, murmuring just a few words to a man at the window table. The viral clip had zero sound. It offered absolutely no context. It merely showed the powerful CEO of Holloway Capital, an executive famous in corporate media for her flawless control, suddenly crossing a crowded dining room wearing a completely unprecedented expression, leaning in and saying something to a guy dining with another woman that made him bolt out of his seat. Office gossip flooded Holloway Capital by the very next afternoon. A lot of it was baseless chatter. Some felt downright cruel. The harshest rumors targeted Nathaniel. The poor guy hadn't even started this drama and had, honestly, just been eating dinner, minding his own business before fate turned his life upside down. The labels people threw around painted him as a scheming opportunist, desperately clawing at corporate success he simply had not earned. You and I know people judge without proof, using the arrogance of outsiders who invent the entire story long before checking a single fact. Grace caught wind of these toxic whispers through the usual corporate rumor mill. They sparked an icy, hyper-focused rage that she smartly kept from showing to her team. She fully realized that any open defense would instantly seem like a confession, and that very confirmation would ultimately destroy Nathaniel instead of actually protecting him. Sebastian Cole marched into her executive suite the second afternoon. He looked sharp and spoke with that perfectly calculated calm, just like he always did. Taking a seat, he lectured her on PR optics and the huge upcoming corporate merger the board spent 16 grueling months trying to secure. He calculated the math of brand reputation at crucial turning points, using that chillingly smooth. You ever notice how a procedural tone keeps conversations safely abstract? Sebastian certainly knew that trick. I couldn't even voice my objections without sounding completely irrational. He never once mentioned Nathaniel by name, but honestly, he didn't need to. I clearly understood that Sebastian didn't care about the corporate acquisition at all. He was just terrified of losing control. He used the buyout to make my protective feelings for Nathaniel look like a massive liability. I kept quiet, thanked him for the advice, and just walked him right out my door. That very afternoon, Nathaniel got a phone call from Emma's school. Some kid in her class had blindly repeated vicious gossip overheard from an adult. And those ugly words were fired straight at Emma on the playground, the way kids casually repeat the cruelties of adults. Perfectly accurate, yet entirely unaware of the crushing weight behind what they say. Emma didn't run straight home and tell her dad about it. She stayed completely silent through dinner and all her evening homework. It was only at bedtime that she finally appeared at his bedroom door and asked a truly heartbreaking question. "Dad, are people at your work being mean to you because of me?" Nathaniel had spent 20 minutes convincing his 7-year-old she wasn't the cause of anything needing to be fixed. By the time she finally fell asleep, he'd made a firm choice. He requested a transfer to a satellite office just 3 days later. Not out of anger, and certainly not because he quit. Because his daughter's peace of mind mattered more, and he couldn't in good conscience keep on choosing to stand blindly at the center of a toxic situation pulling her into its orbit. Let me tell you, fate has a funny way of working. I found his transfer through the HR portal. I saw his name, the new location, and the effective date. My heart just dropped. I closed my laptop, needing a long walk around the executive floor, desperately trying to process my panic into professional calm. Then I went down to find him. He was down in the logistics bay, reviewing shipping manifests with 2 freight coordinators. His expression didn't shift even a fraction when he saw me approach. He calmly finished his sentence, then stepped away from his team to speak with me, projecting the chilling professional calm of a man who owes absolutely nobody an apology. I told him straight out I knew about the transfer. He didn't look surprised at all. He told me plainly and without any bitterness that leaving was the right move for Emma, and he hoped I could understand that. He said he wasn't exactly in the habit of walking away from things he loved, but his little girl's mental peace was strictly non-negotiable, and that this messy corporate situation was hurting her in ways he absolutely wouldn't tolerate anymore. Have you ever heard a truth that just shatters you? I stood in that cold corridor hearing what he was saying, hating myself for creating the very conditions that pushed him away. He had one final thing to tell me. He delivered it quietly and directly, staring right into my eyes without ever looking away once. I can't stay close to someone who only admits I matter when the lights are low, he said. That's not something I can ever ask Emma to watch. You know how one chance encounter can change everything? Grace went back to her penthouse, sitting for ages in its massive, perfectly decorated silence. She had a stunning city view and a professional life perfectly tied with a bow. She looked at the glittering skyline and a highly organized professional life, her strict schedule packing every single free gap with purpose. She kept thinking about the tiny moments she'd quietly gathered over the months, unaware she was even collecting them. Like Nathaniel, kneeling to tie little Emma's shoes in a parking lot before an event. The patient, unhurried focus he gave that simple task, like nothing else in the world mattered. Or the gentle way he always let people finish their thoughts, even when he already knew exactly what they were trying to say. That afternoon she watched him gladly give up the better lunch option to little Emma. He ate the worst meal without a single word, acting like it was his favorite. She wasn't just missing a fleeting romantic feeling. It was his unique grounding presence she simply couldn't find anywhere else. For months, she faked that living without that life-changing connection was totally fine. She was absolutely done pretending. But stick with me here. Before she could act on her choice, Sebastian made a predictable, ruthless move. The file Sebastian's team dug up on Nathaniel wasn't exactly a complete lie. But it was heavily spun the way corporate smear campaigns usually are. Hand-picked facts that looked innocent alone, but together painted a very dark, misleading picture. It zoomed in on Nathaniel's time at Gray Line Logistics right before the startup folded. The paperwork framed his exit using slippery words hinting at serious misconduct without any proof. It was exactly the kind of document that triggers a massive formal investigation by the internal compliance team at Holloway. A review taking weeks, creating a permanent stain on his employment file, regardless of what they found. Sebastian leaked the file on a Wednesday. By early Thursday morning, the toxic rumors had already infected the parent network at little Emma's private school. It spread through a nameless online message, masking a vicious, targeted attack as fake parental concern. Emma's social world completely shifted in that quiet, subtle way kids always notice when the grown-ups, around them, have made a harsh judgment without explaining why. Poor Emma broke down crying in a school bathroom that Thursday afternoon. Her teacher phoned Nathaniel at 2:15, gently but firmly explaining that little Emma was really struggling and suggesting he come pick his daughter up early. Nathaniel finally figured out what had actually happened from Emma herself as she sat quietly in the car's back seat going home. She stared out the window, crying that she didn't get why everything was suddenly about grown-up drama that had absolutely nothing to do with her. He somehow kept his cool during the whole drive home. He stayed perfectly calm through dinner, too. Once Emma was safely asleep, he slumped at the kitchen table, finally allowing himself a few minutes of the dark, controlled, silent rage he had been bottling up ever since he realized exactly how he was being framed. Then Chloe Bennett made a call to Grace. You see, Chloe was doing her own quiet digging. Highly careful and totally methodical because she was someone who found finding corporate patterns super useful professionally. My team had traced the forged documents' origins right back to a single contracted research source. The digital trail was undeniable. While not yet fully admissible, it pointed straight at Sebastian Cole. Chloe didn't have enough proof for a judge, but she definitely had enough to bring to me. I sat there absorbing every single word of her report. Hanging up, the reality hit me. Have you ever realized your silence is doing harm? Mine wasn't protecting Nathaniel. It was just providing cover for the exact people trying to ruin him. I drove to his apartment that night without even calling. I'd shed my CEO armor for casual clothes. Was it just a detail or a signal? Honestly, I wasn't entirely sure myself. His daughter, Emma, answered the door, her eyes still carrying the day's exhaustion. She sized me up with that harsh, calculating assessment that children always reserve for the adults they haven't quite figured out. Then Nathaniel appeared behind her. One look at his face told me I wasn't unwelcome, exactly, but I definitely needed to have something real to say. I looked right at him. If I don't stand up now, I lose the right to tell you I ever meant any of it. The corporate investigation I launched that Friday wasn't loud or vengeful. In business leadership, screaming rarely gets you the most effective results. It was methodical and properly documented, routed strictly through legal channels so nobody could claim I was acting on personal motives. I immediately suspended data access for everyone involved, pending review. Then I contacted our outside legal counsel. I phoned 2 board members I knew would actually listen to facts before they blindly reacted. 2 days later, I sat down with the full board. I presented Nathaniel's actual factual history at Grayline. I showed them the whistleblower complaints he filed right before the startup collapsed. I laid out the exact timeline from his internal warning to his sudden firing. I handed over employment records spanning every single job he'd ever held. These were the files of a man who showed up and did the work with total integrity. He'd been let go from that one job through absolutely zero failure of his own. I put these hard facts right before the board, the exact same way I present executive data to any room, crystal clear. Zero unnecessary emotion, just the icy precision that comes from knowing you are absolutely correct. Nathaniel Brooks was not some guy with a murky financial past. He was a man who caught a massive corporate fraud and was quietly punished for it. He then rebuilt his entire professional life from scratch without seeking public pity or cashing in favors from anyone. Sebastian sensed the room shifting. He tried one last move. He played the concerned executive, suggesting that my personal feelings as CEO shouldn't be driving our institutional policy. I simply let him finish. Then I said, this institution will not be weaponized to crush an honest man just because he inconveniences someone who has access to our systems. That is exactly what this is, and I want that on record. It went on record. Stick with me here. That Monday I drove to Emma's school, not as a corporate CEO. I went as someone holding real factual information about a messy situation that had been judged on terrible data. I sat down with the principal and made my case. You see, a chance meeting can change a life. Those parents spreading that rumor? Well, they quickly learned their version of events was completely wrong. Grace didn't throw CEO money around to fix this. Instead, she spent 45 morning minutes speaking absolute truth in a room that never expected her to even show up. From down the hallway, young Emma watched Grace step out of the school office. Emma watched her cross the lobby, and something in her quiet little face visibly shifted. It was the start of that fierce trust children only extend to adults who actually show up when things get hard, instead of just fading away into the background. Nathaniel felt deeply moved and endlessly grateful, but he wasn't quite done processing it. He needed to figure out if the woman who showed up this week was the exact same person who had been pulling away from him for 3 months. He was never the kind of guy to rush his answers. Once the immediate corporate crisis finally cooled down, Chloe met Grace for coffee, spelling out the rest of the story for her. That private dinner at Meridian was actually about creating a safety net for kids whose parents had lost stable jobs through absolutely no fault of their own. The exact same tough category Nathaniel had hit. A situation where he stubbornly refused to take a single dime of personal charity. The fund was meant to channel educational money to a handful of qualifying families every year, and Nathaniel was actually the one who pushed hard for the wider eligibility rules. His one firm condition was that this money had to help people far outside his own personal bubble. Chloe looked over her coffee cup at Grace and plainly said, "He really doesn't look at me the way he looks at you." She said it with zero drama, just offering a very clear, useful observation. Grace drove straight to the park where Nathaniel usually took Emma on quiet weekday evenings. She finally spotted them on a bench near the water. Little Emma was sound asleep against her dad's arm in that heavy way kids only crash when they know the adult holding them is the absolute safest place in the entire world. Nathaniel gently settled Emma down. In the back of his car, he returned to the bench and they sat in the fading evening light. Then he finally shared what he had held back in that school parking lot. He brought up the afternoon she silently rearranged 2 corporate meetings on her own calendar, just giving him a clear window to grab Emma from a school event, without ever bragging that she had done it. He confessed that he'd noticed her kindness, but hadn't known exactly what to do with it. He mentioned the way she always looked at his daughter. Not with that fake rehearsed warmth some grown-ups put on for kids when they desperately want an audience to applaud them. But with the truly genuine, raw softness of someone reacting to a real connection. He admitted he'd made a choice, long before they unexpectedly met at that restaurant, that keeping his distance was smart, but that distance never actually changed how he truly felt. Then he laid out the harder truth. You and I have both doubted people, right? He admitted he wasn't sure until this exact week if she'd actually fight for something at her own personal expense. Not for the spotlight, and not because public relations required it, but simply because it was the right thing. Grace replied, I don't need a life that simple. I just need a place where I can be honest. You and I know a chance meeting can change a life. Picture them there. Autumn light filtering down, nobody speaking. That silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the peace of two people who finally stopped managing a crisis, trying to remember how to just exist together. The space between them wasn't some lingering misunderstanding anymore. It was a clear choice, and they both finally landed on the same one. 14 days later, Holloway Capital rolled out its new community initiative at a formal gala. The guest list packed in board members, institutional partners, and a small press crew, plus colleagues from the very place where Nathaniel and Chloe's unexpected chance meeting first happened. Grace's corporate team handed her a totally standard speech: vision, strategic alignment, and long-term community investment. But Grace went off script. She outlined the new scholarship program the fund would actually pay for, detailing its entire structure. The exact design Nathaniel fought for, using the framework Chloe helped build. The core goal of reaching vulnerable kids sitting in households that faced brutal displacement completely outside the control of the adults involved. And then she said Nathaniel's name. She said it publicly, standing there with the heavy conviction of a woman who finally meant every word, no longer spinning PR for a crowd. She confessed that the entire initiative was directly shaped by the example of a man whose dedication to doing things right, even in the absolute absence of any cheering crowd or reward, reminded her of a truth she had always known. Intellectually, but we all need to learn that true integrity is never shown off in a public performance, but in quiet actions when the stakes are completely personal. She declared that true success wasn't just measured by outcomes. It's measured by who you stay when life hands you every excuse to become a much smaller person. The whole room went totally quiet. That heavy kind of quiet when everyone knows they're hearing the absolute truth. Nathaniel stood firmly near the back of that room alongside Emma. Emma had her tiny hand wrapped around two of his fingers, her classic grip for crowded spaces. And she was staring at the front of the room with the patient, wide-eyed focus of a 7-year-old who knows something big is shifting but just doesn't quite have the grown-up words for it yet. Grace stepped right off that platform and walked the entire length of the room. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't putting on a dramatic show of urgency. She approached him with the steady pace of a woman who made a massive life choice and was owning it without the theatrics. She stopped dead when she reached him, and she looked him right in the eyes. The last time I said I missed you. I wasn't brave enough to mean it publicly. I am ready now. I refuse to keep living my life as if you don't matter. Emma glanced up at her dad, that tiny hand gripping his fingers squeezed just a little. Nathaniel just stared at Grace for a long, heavy moment. He studied her the exact way he looked at things that demanded every ounce of his focus. I don't need perfect, he whispered. I just need to know you won't run away when things get hard. I won't run away, she replied. He finally reached out and took her hand. That unexpected reunion wasn't loud, it wasn't overly dramatic. It was the quiet move of someone who finished overthinking and finally found absolute, undeniable certainty. Everyone watching felt the shift, yet no one there needed to explain what that fateful encounter actually meant. Soon after, Sebastian Cole was ousted from the corporate buyout talks. Within days, he faced a formal review over the shady tactics his team used under his strict watch. That investigation dragged on for several months, and the final report completely ruined his professional reputation. Margaret Bennett's charity trust finalized its major donation to the scholarship fund around the same time, while Chloe handled all the legal red tape with the exact same quiet skill she brought to every deal. Meanwhile, Nathaniel took a job as head of the Community Outreach Division, which had grown significantly thanks to the new company project. This fresh role demanded exactly the kind of leadership he possessed: building real structure, honest choices, and a drive to build things that actually mattered, rather than just chasing shallow public praise. He naturally excelled at the work from day one. Emma needed about 2 weeks to bounce back entirely, which is just about how long a very tough 7-year-old takes to realize the adults around her are no longer stressed out by corporate drama she can't fix. Once she finally figured that out, she went right back to caring mostly about whether her painted project for school would dry fast enough, and whether her dad would actually remember to grab the exact right flavor of yogurt. Let's jump to an October Tuesday. You and I can see them around Nathaniel's cozy kitchen table, the ceiling lamp glowing warmly against the early autumn twilight outside. Emma sat right between the adults with the bossy comfort of a kid who decided this new life setup works perfectly. The table was covered in the leftovers of a homemade dinner that was super ambitious and mostly burned, while little Emma was lecturing Grace in great detail about all the major cooking mistakes she noticed during the meal. Halfway through, Emma stopped her food critique and stared straight at the female executive, using that sharp, honest focus she got from her dad. "Do you still miss my dad?" she asked. Grace studied the kid's deeply serious face, then glanced at Nathaniel, who wore that quiet look she now fully understood: patient, present, and completely unhurried. Grace pushed her chair back, leaning down right to Emma's eye level, and the young girl's face changed. Grace simply said, "Now I don't just miss him." Emma stared right at her for a moment. Then she went back to eating, looking totally satisfied, like a boss who just got the exact answer she needed. Nathaniel stayed quiet. He didn't need to speak. Some phrases are born from pure jealousy, while others stem from deep panic. And some finally burst out from the heavy weight of feeling real love for months, refusing to admit it aloud. Because when Grace Holloway marched across that busy restaurant on a normal Thursday night, blurting out 3 little words she never meant to speak, you and I know she thought she ruined everything right then. But what that chance meeting actually did was unlock the only path leading to a life truly worth living. She only wanted to protect her heart. Instead, for the first time in forever, the CEO was simply honest, and that one moment changed absolutely everything. Turns out, that chance meeting was the start of everything.